Everyone, this is Ashley Tucker from My Favorite Things. I have a really cute Christmas card to share with you today. It's my first Christmas card of the year, and I was really excited to use this stamp set. My Favorite Things just came out with this cat stamp set called Meowy Christmas, and I love cats, so anytime there's a cat stamp set, I'm happy. I picked out 4 of the cats from the set and I put them on my MISTI tool, and I stamped them onto Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock with a Copic-friendly black ink. You can see along the top of the paper where I tested out some different colors of Copic markers in order to find color combinations that I really wanted to use for each of these cats. And I wrote down the marker numbers in the cases where I liked the color combinations. I did want to keep all of these cats very neutral in color, so I didn't do any orange cats because I'm going to be using some colors throughout the card that I keep very consistent, and I wanted to keep the cats neutral so that they don't clash with those colors. The cat on the left, I'm actually keeping white, so you can see that I didn't really add much color to him, but I did add a little bit of warm gray for shading because I didn't want him to be completely white. I wanted it to be just a little bit more realistic, so I added some shading underneath his body. And of course, I had to do an all-black cat because that is what I have. I have a cat that's completely black, and her name is Bellatrix, but we just call her Bella. And I love her, even though I am very allergic to her. As you can see, I'm not using a black marker to color in my black cat. I'm using some really dark gray colors instead so that I can have highlights and shading, and so that you can actually see the details on the cat. If I were to use a black marker, you wouldn't be able to see the little face. For this last cat, I'm doing a white cat with black spots. For the black spots, I'm using a few different gray markers. Once those spots are added in, I'm going to take my colorless blender and blend out the edges of those spots so that it isn't such a harsh line of color where they start, and it kind of blends into the white area. And I actually did this same exact thing with the shading on the white cat. As for all of the details for these cat images, I am using the color combination that I picked out for this card, which are blue and red colors. So I started with this Christmas ornament, and I actually color Christmas ornaments very much like I color balloons. I left a large highlight circle and I color around it with my other colors, and I add some deeper shading in kind of a half circle around that highlight, leaving the outer edge the lighter of the colors, and then I shade over the entire thing with a really light color. Not sure if this is the best method for coloring in ornaments, but I find that it worked for me and it looks pretty good. And I will come back in later with a white gel pen and add highlights on that to make it look even more reflective. I did break away from my color combination just a little bit, and I added in some yellow colors to make the top of the ornament look gold, as well as the bells that are tied around the cat on the right's neck. I could have colored those in and made them look silver instead of gold, and then I would have used gray markers and they would have been neutral, and that would not be breaking from my color combination. But I was just really feeling gold for them when I was coloring this, so I decided to break my own rules, which you can always break your own rules. That's the best thing about when you make your own rules. You can break them. So I broke my rules and I made them gold. When I was coloring in the red Christmas ornament, some of that red color actually bled onto the paws of the cat. So once I was done adding all of the coloring to these cats, I took my white gel pen and I just colored in those paws to cover up that mistake. After that, I used the coordinating dies to cut out all the cats and I set them aside, and then I started to work on my background. This is going to be a Slimline card, so I have a piece of snow cone blue cardstock, and that is cut to 8.5 by 3.5, and I prepped that with a powder tool because I'm going to be embossing quite a bit on it. I picked out 4 of the smaller images from the same stamp set as the cats to create my own pattern. The images that I'm using are 2 different snowflakes, 1 ball of yarn, and 1 ornament stamp. I lined them up in my Misty tool, and then I stamped them several times going all the way down this piece of cardstock, and I stamped them with Versamark ink and embossed them with a clear embossing powder. I then turned my paper around so that all of the images would be stamped upside down. That way all of them aren't exactly the same and I get a little bit of variation in my pattern. And I stamped them all again in between the lines of the first stamping. And just like I did with the first rows of stamping, I used Versamark ink and a clear embossing powder. Since I did quite a bit of embossing on this paper, in order to prevent as much warping as possible, I made sure that my heat gun was really nice and warmed up before I actually used it on the paper. Once the embossing was done, to give this background a kind of frosty look, I grabbed my Distress Oxide ink in the shade Broken China, and I blended on the edges of the background using a blender brush. And once the blending was done, I just used a cloth to kind of wipe off any of that ink that was sitting on top of the embossing. And you can see that the embossed areas actually stay the lighter blue. I used one of the double-stitched rectangles Slimline dies to cut out this background. I really like the stitching detail that this die has. And then I popped up the background onto a Slimline card base. So the die makes this a little bit smaller than the base so that I have a tiny white border around the edge. I added some foam tape squares to the back of all of my cats, and I popped up the first cat, but after I popped up the first cat, I realized that I wanted to make something for my black cat to sit on, so I'm going to create this little stool for him. I used the Cat Plant Perches die set, which has this little stool in it, and I die cut that 3 times out of craft cardstock, and I actually stacked them all together using liquid adhesive so that I could have a nice thick piece. And then I cut 2 of these little toppers for the stool, and I glued those together, and then I glued them to the actual stool so that it looks like it has this little red cushion on it. I then added some adhesive right onto the cat so that I could stick him onto that stool, and I actually used my tweezers to hold him in place until the glue dried. Alright, so now I can get back to adding the cats onto the card. I used my T-square ruler in order to line up the cat on the right-hand side with the cat on the left-hand side. I find it a lot easier to add things to the sides and then add the middle images so that I can get the spacing really correct. For the sentiment on my card, I am going to use a red cardstock. And I picked out one of the stamps from the set which says Meowy Christmas, and I stamped that with Versamark ink, and I'm going to emboss it with a white embossing powder. And I did make sure to go over my paper, like always, with a powder tool so that none of the embossing would get anywhere except where I want it to be. I used a Skinny Strips sentiment die to cut that out, and then I popped it up on the card with some foam tape. I grabbed a bunch of clear sequins in different sizes and I spread them across the card, kind of keeping them loosely in groups of 3, and then I adhered them all with liquid adhesive. A little bit of my footage did get lost here. After I added these sequins, I came in with a white gel pen and I added some dots to the background, and you can see them in this next shot. I also used that white gel pen to add details and highlights to my cats, and I used a glitter brush to go over the sentiment, and then this card was all done. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you really enjoyed this card design and that it gave you some inspiration for your own Christmas cards. I hope you have a wonderful day today, and I'll see you next time.